I don't want to show that to anybody, but certainly you wouldn't show it to a businessman who is helping us so much. He's a great patriot. He's paying a big price for helping us cut costs, and he's doing a great job. But I certainly wouldn't want, Elon has businesses in China, and he would be susceptible perhaps to that. But it was such a fake story. The New York Times is just as fake as CNN and MSDNC.
President Trump at the White House today, responding to reports that during a visit to the Pentagon this morning, Elon Musk was set to receive a top-secret briefing, according to the New York Times. In a report that was later confirmed by the Wall Street Journal, the briefing included top-secret war plans the military would employ in a potential war with China. Joining me to discuss this and more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Brett, Trump held a press conference today with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, where he called those reports fake news. What do we know about Musk's visit to the Pentagon, and did this China meeting ever happen?
Yeah, Drew, Elon Musk, obviously Tesla CEO, SpaceX CEO, billionaire advisor to the president. He was at the Pentagon this morning. He did meet with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth for a little over an hour. Pete Hegseth said that this meeting focused on innovation and cost-cutting efforts, so tying it to these DOGE efforts that Elon Musk has been leading. Still not totally clear if China came up at all, but certainly the White House and the administration really pushing back on the idea that these war plans came up in any capacity.
And Trump also announced a new fighter jet that's in development. What do we know about that?
Yeah, so these fighter jets, which are being called F-47s, which of course is perhaps a nod to Trump being the 47th president. This is a big investment for the Pentagon. Not disclosing the exact cost of these fighter jets, which of course is notable at a time when there's this big emphasis on cutting costs and transparency and efficiency. But Trump had Pete Hegseth and a couple of Air Force generals in the Oval Office today to tout this announcement, essentially framing it that these new fighter jets will keep the U.S. At the forefront and keep their military, capable of doing whatever kind of missions are needed moving forward.
Calls are mounting from top Tesla investors for Elon Musk to step down as CEO of the company. The groundswell comes as Tesla's stock price has plummeted more than 50% since its high in December. During that period, the company's market value dropped by $800 billion. Brett, it seems like the White House is doing everything it can to buoy the company. Hatch Act aside, does that help or hurt Tesla's case, having the White House be its biggest cheerleader?
Yeah, Drew, it almost really kind of, I think, emphasizes or exacerbates what we've seen with Tesla, which is that as Elon Musk gets closer to the White House, Tesla becomes almost this symbol to a lot of people, this political symbol, of supporting the administration, which of course is ironic because it's an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles are something that Democrats had really boosted during the Biden administration as a way to fight climate change. But certainly, we're seeing the Trump administration, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, going on and encouraging people to buy Tesla stock. Donald Trump holding this exhibition of Tesla vehicles at the White House. Certainly seeing the Trump administration make this concerted effort to boost Tesla. But as you said, or as you pointed out, certainly may only kind of force critics of Tesla to really dig in.
Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. Officials from Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. all set to be in Saudi Arabia next week for ceasefire talks. I don't know if the gulf between Ukraine and Russia could get any bigger. Russia wants to end all foreign military and intelligence support for Ukraine. Ukraine wants European boots on the ground to protect it from further Russian aggression. What should we expect from these meetings next week?
Yeah, I think people should go into these meetings with sort of a dose of skepticism, certainly not setting expectations too high, because as you said, Drew, the two sides seem to have very different views of where things should be headed. With Russia, there was this talk of this sort of very limited 30-day ceasefire against targeting energy infrastructure, but President Zelensky of Ukraine was posting photos on social media of Russia, the consequences of Russian bombings and drone attacks in Ukraine, just hours after that proposal was made. So, I think there's certainly skepticism about whether Russia seriously wants to end this war at a time when they're making gains on the battlefield. President Trump in the Oval Office suggested that already maybe a peace agreement and contracts about divvying up land are being drawn up. So certainly the Trump administration is optimistic, but I do think that people should approach this with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Meantime, the UK on Thursday hosted military leaders from the so-called Coalition of the Willing to draw up plans for a proposed peacekeeping force in Ukraine. How realistic is that? Do Europeans have the means and will for prolonged deployment of troops in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've certainly heard from folks like Emmanuel Macron from France, like Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Britain, who have advocated for this kind of peacekeeping force as a way to ensure that any peace agreement stays intact and is lasting. But I think you raise a good question about whether this is an indefinite peacekeeping force, if this is something that all European nations are willing to commit to. Certainly something to keep an eye on as these peace talks between Ukraine and Russia progress.
And are they willing to commit to that without significant U.S. backing? You know, the Europeans were not invited to these talks next week in Saudi Arabia. To some, it's another example of the Trump administration turning away from NATO allies, but that is setting the administration on a collision course with Republican defense hawks. The Republican chairs of the Senate and House Armed Services Committee issued a strong rebuke to any plans to diminish the U.S. role in NATO. What did they say, and how strong is Republican support for NATO in Congress? I will note that Senator Mike Lee from Utah, who is influential with the Republican base, has called on the U.S. to leave NATO.
Yeah, I do think that that latter point is good to note that there are folks who are maybe more MAGA than others, more Trump aligned than others who are fine leaving NATO. But I do think certainly as you pointed out, we saw Senator Roger Wicker, Senator Mitch McConnell, and some folks in the House push back on this proposal to sort of essentially scale back U.S. Involvement in NATO leadership, command leadership. And certainly, I think it gets at an issue where we saw rare Republican pushback. You know, Republicans seem to really pick their spots. This is one where we did see Republicans push back. President Trump certainly has said that he is, skeptical of NATO countries that don't contribute enough to defense spending. So, this could actually be a clash worth watching between Trump and Republicans on Capitol Hill.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Brett Samuels, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
Voters are flocking to town halls to voice their frustration, and Republicans are not the only lawmakers experiencing testy confrontations. Democrats facing the outrage of their voters over their response to President Trump. And in the midst of it all, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are traveling across the country on their Fighting Oligarchy tour. Joining us to break it all down, Julia Manchester, national political reporter here at the Hill. Some of these Democratic town halls have been pretty heated. How is the Democratic Party responding to this pressure from its base?
Well, it's interesting because earlier this week the pressure was really on House Republicans, and we saw that the Democratic National Committee and a number of other Democratic Party committees teamed up to send a number of House Democrats and even some Senate Democrats to these Republican districts to really put the pressure on House Republicans. We know that House Republican leadership had advised a number of their members to not hold in-person town halls, to do them virtually so you don't get the image of these viral confrontations. But lo and behold, we're seeing it happening to Democrats, especially in the midst of that continuing resolution legislation to fund the government that was passed last week. But even if Democratic lawmakers voted against that with most of the party, they're still getting blowback. We're hearing from a lot of Democratic constituents that they just aren't happy with the way the party is responding to the Trump administration. They're sick of what they say is an excuse of their hands are tied, they're in the minority. They want them to take Donald Trump and Elon Musk, his name is being brought up quite a bit. They want them to take them head on.
Do you think this is going to result in a change of action, change of attitude that we see here from Democrats in Washington?
It very well could, because it's coming as we're seeing, more polling showing very low favorability ratings for Democrats, among Democrats, particularly for Democratic leadership. I think a recent CNN poll and an NBC poll released last weekend showed their favorability ratings within their own party in the 20s. So that's going to be difficult for Democrats going forward. I think there is a real conversation happening about if they should change their messaging, and you're starting to hear some conversations about maybe a change in leadership, but we haven't seen too much movement on that yet.
Sanders and AOC are hitting the road for this Fighting Oligarchy tour. They're out west. Let's take a listen to a rally yesterday in Las Vegas.
We are here together because an extreme concentration of power and corruption is taking over this country like never before.
No, we will not accept an oligarchic form of society where a handful of billionaires run the government.
So Democrats are kind of lost in the woods looking for a message. Do you think the economic populism of Bernie Sanders and AOC can unite the party, or are purple state Democrats going to end up pushing back saying, hey, wait a minute, this is taking the party too far left?
You know, it's interesting. We was talking with progressives this week and asking them, look, what do Democrats say besides saying our hands are tied and we are in the minority? They point to AOC and Bernie Sanders and the messaging they're putting out. And you're also seeing this tour, even though it's somewhat geared towards Democrats. Bernie Sanders told the New York Times in an interview yesterday that it's also meant to encourage independents to potentially seek public office and to get involved more. So we're really, I think, starting to see a shift away, or maybe a change from the Democratic Party brand. You know, with centrist Democrats, I think it's interesting because when we talk about 2028 and potential presidential contenders, a lot of them floated are centrist Democrats. Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer. So, you know, I think there still is that divide, but you're starting to see the progressives more and more point to this economic populist message as a way to hit back against the Trump administration.
Yeah, and you heard some pushing back from Alyssa Slotkin, Democratic senator from Michigan. She's a moderate. She had some choice words saying, I can't be AOC. I'm from a purple state. I have to get things done. What have progressives ever got accomplished? What did you make of Slotkin's comments, kind of putting a stake in the ground, saying, I'm going to stand up for the moderate wing of the Democratic Party?
Well, she's not wrong, because when you are a House member and you're a lawmaker like AOC and you represent a very homogeneous, very blue district, of course you're going to lean more to the left. That's what your constituents want. But if you're Alyssa Slotkin from a state that Donald Trump flipped, that Joe Biden also flipped in 2020, but Donald Trump flipped it back in, last November, you're appealing to a much broader subset of people. You're not only appealing towards, you know, the Democratic spectrum, but you're also appealing to Republicans and independents. So I think we absolutely understand what she's saying. But when I talked to a number of Democratic activists about her comments yesterday, they said, look, every lawmaker, whether they're from a purple state or a blue state, needs to be an organizer here in working with the grassroots. That seems to be a big criticism right now of more centrist Democrats.
And Republicans, no doubt, also facing anger at their own town halls. A lot of people, we've been saying it on the show, echoes of 2010 and the Tea Party movement. We'll see how far that goes. It'll be interesting to watch. Julia Manchester, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
A large fire near Heathrow in London has knocked out power, shutting down the airport and disrupting travel for hundreds of thousands of passengers. The airport is Europe's busiest flight hub, with just over 6 million passengers traveling through in January alone. Over 1,300 flights were affected, and the impacts of the shutdown are likely to last several days. Many passengers are rescheduling their travel, and airlines are working to get planes and crews to the right places. Authorities do not know what caused the fire and have found no suspicious evidence. Residents in West London say they heard a large explosion followed by a fireball and clouds of smoke. Heathrow says it will remain closed until at least 11:59 p.m. London time. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.